By the 5th century, Rome was collapsing. In 406, Germanic barbarians crossed the Rhine, devastating the west. 1 year later, 6,000 legionnaires in Britannia revolted, proclaiming Flavius Claudius Constantinus, commonly known as Constantine III, as emperor. Constantine was a common soldier, promising riches and glory to his troops, who had not been paid in years. He hurried across the channel to Gaul, with the goal of taking Rome and solidifying himself as legitimate emperor, where he could set about imperial reforms to stabilize the decaying behemoth. Sadly, he was betrayed and murdered. By 410, Roman magistrates were expelled from Britannia. The empire was powerless to protect its distant province, while Alaric and the Visigoths sacked Rome for the first time in 800 years. Throughout the 5th century, the Anglo-Saxons arrived in Britannia, forever erasing the Roman presence on the island. But don't get down, you were 29,000 Romans, and the 90% who haven't subscribed yet. History is forever changed as Constantine III decided to stay in Britannia, mirroring the actions of Postumus in Gaul. This required incredible diplomatic maneuvers and charisma, as his troops wanted to garner imperial glory. Romans in Britannia did not view themselves any differently to Romans in Gaul or Italy. These legions came from the entire empire and wanted to defend their native homelands. Constantine was not a separatist, and there was almost a 100% chance he would be assassinated for this decision. But, by the grace of God, his men agreed to stay. A minority of his soldiers were fine with the decision, having already married locals throughout their tour on the Isles. Constantine renounced the title of Augustus in favor of the lesser Caesar, indicating no challenge towards imperial claimants, open to working with any challenger. A new senate was formed in Londinium, allowing Constantine to centralize his authority. His centurions became the heads of the new senate, while common soldiers became the new class of patricians. Vast land grants were distributed to the soldiers according to their units in a Neo-Marian system. This property tied them to the island and helped them survive the initial years. Word was sent throughout nearby provinces to come to Britannia, bringing in tens of thousands of Romans unhappy with Honorius. The new society quickly became Spartiate, as military strength was crucial for its survival. Fortifications were constructed along the coast to defend them from raids, while a large auxiliary force was established. Constantine spent years campaigning against the Picts, Celts, Hibernians, and raiding German tribes. The Hibernian settlements in Wales were destroyed, paving room for Roman colonization of the region. After 15 years of hard campaigning, he successfully integrated the lands up to Hadrian's Wall, which was slowly rebuilt, keeping the Picts in check. By 426, the island was relatively peaceful and stable, as focus shifted on administration. Cities and towns were reinforced, while Western Romans flocked to Britannia as their empire was collapsing, helping to increase the Roman numbers. Emphasis was placed on the navy, similar to Themistocles' wooden walls of the Athenians, curbing the threat to the core Roman possessions and giving them a strong facade. Monasteries became crucial for the cultural survival on the island as the West collapsed. Paganism was virtually eradicated under Constantine, while the monasteries kept diligent records and knowledge from their past. In these sacred halls, the British mythos around Brutus of Troy, the Trojan prince who fathered the British people, helped tie the native Britons with the Romans in a semi-equal Trojan legacy. This led to Londinium slowly being known by its older name, Trinovantum. Young men, mandated to serve in the legions, were given a rigorous Nicene Christian education to develop their intellectual and spiritual practices, further distancing themselves from their brutish heathen neighbors, instilling a sense of superiority. Constantine III was succeeded by his son, Constans II. Trade slowed down, but just as historically documented by the monk Gildas, the economy thrived without the centralized Roman taxation. Cities continued to grow under the Romans and flourish, becoming far wealthier than the continental counterparts. The last major wave of Roman migrants arrived under Constans, those who saw Britannia as a glimmering light in the looming wave of Germanic darkness. These were Romans who still looked down on the Greeks and wanted a purer Roman polity. During the middle of the 5th century, Hibernian raiders ransacked the western coast, capturing a young Christian man, Patricus, who was enslaved in Hibernia for 6 years, fostering his relationship with God before escaping back to Britannia. The capture of Patricus forced greater focus to be placed upon the navy, as it had begun to lull behind, while more fortifications were built on the coast, protecting Britannia from the Hibernian and Gothic raids in the east, while Anglo-Saxon raids were rebuffed in the west. Eventually, Constans crushed a major Hibernian force in the Mare Hibernicum, forever ending their threat. A few years later, a major Pict attack struck the north, as some senators clamored to march on the continent and take Rome, saving the empire. The people were eager for a conquest, forcing their Caesar's hand. Constans responded by mobilizing the legions and marching north with 8,000 men, following the footsteps of Septimius Severus. The next 3 years were spent destroying the Picts, but Caledonia resisted, and Constans was forced to draw his new border at Antoninus's wall. The wall was rebuilt, and the new lands were given to soldiers to fortify and Romanize. Around the same time, Patricus, now a Christian bishop, returned to Ireland, beginning to Christianize the heathens and bring them under Roman influence. Constans was unable to father a child, passing the title of Caesar on to his 15-year-old nephew Arturus upon his passing. In the Histories of the Kings of Britain, written by Geoffrey of Monmouth, a 12th century Welsh historian, King Arthur was the grandson of Constantine III. This shook the realm, so a group of centurions, led by Arturus' cousin Moderatus, hatched a conspiracy to overthrow their young liege, take over the realm, and make a play for Rome. Word of the plot was leaked to his confessor, Merlinus, who informed the Caesar. Arturus assembled his legions and marched north to meet Moderatus, who was stationed in Lugavalium. Before the battle, Arturus followed Constantine the Great's footsteps before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, praying for divine aid. His prayers were answered, seeing a vision of the Virgin Mary and receiving a sword known as Excalibur. He instructed his men to paint a white lily on their shields, denoting her favor. The two forces met at Camboglana the following day, in a fierce and brutal conflict, but Arturus crushed the rebels, executing the conspiratorial leaders. Praise was given to Mary after the battle, and the fleur-de-lis was forever cemented as a British symbol. Word spread to many barbarians of the ongoing chaos, renewing their invasions. The Picts struck during the Battle of Camboglana, prompting an immediate retaliation by Arturus. He was determined to rid his island of the heathens once and for all. The armies of Moderatus were not punished, instead combining with his to eradicate the Picts. He met the armies of their king, Necton I, and destroyed them. The next 4 years were spent defanging the beasts with constant battles, but eventually Arturus subjugated them. Caledonia had finally, after 400 years, become Roman. The campaigns in Caledonia did not go unnoticed, with raids picking up along their eastern coast. In 473, Ingo, a high chieftain of the Germanic tribes, decided to lead a massive force for Britannia. Thousands of Germanic warriors boarded ships to conquer the island, sensing the weakness in their young king. But their naval forces were met by Arturus at the Battle of Mare Germanicum. The heathen hordes were completely obliterated by Arturus, forever ending the threat of Germans towards Britannia. After the victory, his men called him Arturus Draconem, Latin for sea dragon. These victories cemented the House of Draconum as the unchallenged dynasty of Britannia, and in 476, Romulus Augustus, the last Western Roman emperor, abdicated the title, so Arturus elevated himself from Caesar to Augustus, claiming the title of Western Roman Emperor. However, just as with their eastern brothers, the Romans in Britannia would slowly become known by a different name, the Arturians.